two digits of their phone number is 92. Could you please identify yourself so we can identify you on the screen?
This is Supervisor Draybeck.
Thank you, Supervisor Draybeck. Being 7 o'clock, we'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And please remain standing because that will be followed by a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street in the city of Wausau at 7 p.m. on Thursday, October 15th, 2020, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone, please put your phones on silent or any other electronic devices, and also request all of the audience to put your devices on mute as to not to interrupt the meeting. And we will move on to roll call. I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Beestrom.
Here.
Boots.
Here.
Book.
Here.
Butke.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Seiler.
Here.
Conway.
Here.
Dickinson.
Here.
Draybeck.
Here.
Pfeifferich. Fisher.
Here.
Gaber.
Here.
Gibbs.
Here.
Gonering.
Here.
Guild.
Here.
Gums. Harris.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Johnson. Krause. Lamont.
Present.
Leahy.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mask.
Here.
McEwen.
Here.
Oberbeck. Opal. Robinson.
Here.
Rosenberg. Schley.
Here.
Seefelt.
Here.
Soibert.
Here.
Stark.
Here.
Van Cray.
Here.
Vol.
Here.
Zhang.
Sorry, here.
Gums. Opal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here, including the viewing audience, and any people that have joined us via WebEx by phone or by WebEx itself. We will move on to agenda item number 7, 15-minute public comment. We have two individuals who have registered to public comment. We have Tara A. Revor of 628 Jackson Street. Tara, are you on or with us? Again, Tara, are you with us? Okay, I'll ask after our next public comment again. We have with us John Gravine. He would like to address the board. So, Mr. Gravine, if you come up here and use the mic so that it can be heard, thank you. And if you'd give your address, that would be appreciated. No, the mic, right, the standing mic? There we go. Thank you.
Hi, is it on? Is it on? Oh, okay. My name is John Gravine. I live at 1650 Naugert Drive, Merrill, Wisconsin. And the reason I want to make a public comment is about this pilot program that you want to start with the city of Wausau in providing transportation with the buses to remote area. I feel you're serving a very small portion of the Marathon County public, and it's more of the residents. I don't see other people coming outside of city of Wausau to use the bus transit system. I think it's not a good idea. There's a lot of things that I could go on and on about. I got a lot of questions. I'll try and keep it short. You know, in the resolution, it talks about evaluation. Who's going to evaluate it? The people that ride the bus? They're going to like it. They ain't going to like that it's only one day a week. It's just, to me, you start a program, and it always seems like it needs a little bit more. It goes on, and it goes on. Then all of a sudden, it comes to budget time, and some of the programs get cut. And you know, why start a program unless we got all kinds of money that we don't know what to do with? You know, I don't think we need to start another program that serves a small portion of Marathon County residents. This is something that, you know, yes, the city can do it. I don't have a problem with the city doing it. What portion is the city contributing to this little pilot program? Is anybody else contributing to it? Is Remoten contributing to it? I can't see where Remoten would. It's not really serving them. It's not really, you know, so it's just basically the residents of Marathon County that live in the city limits. It's just, to me, there's other ways we can serve the whole community, the whole county, all the residents of Marathon County. There's just in road projects, I would like to see a road project to help out the city of Wausau. I would like to see a road going along the railroad tracks to the old former Broco. That would be another artery coming right into the city of Wausau. That would help. Bridge is already there. The state wouldn't have to maintain another bridge, and it would be a nice scenic thing going right out that way. I'm all for the city of Wausau. I don't, you know, have nothing against them. We don't want a distressed area. We want to help one another. And I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We also had one other person that contacted me, again, Tara Revor. Are you on the meeting? Now would be the time that you would be able to address the board. Again, one last time, Tara Revor. Okay, we will move on to item number 8, education presentation and/or reports. Item 8A, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any chairpersons or designees wish to make a report to the board? Seeing none, we will move on to item 8B, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Ben Clark, and Donna Krause would like to introduce Ben. So Donna?
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I would like to tell you a little bit about Ben Clark. He has a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Stevens Point and a master's in public history at UW-Eau Claire. After a few years of volunteering for the Marathon County Historical Society and the creator of 2 exhibits, Ben Clark was hired as an archivist. For the past 5 years, Ben Clark has modernized the Marathon County Historical Society's archival collections and databases, overseen the digitization efforts of the organization, answered hundreds of research questions, and developed digital content through online exhibits, videos, and live streams to interesting stories on the history of Marathon County. He has put his research skills to good use as a speaker for the History Speaks lecture series on the Fromm Brothers Fur Farm, the Wisconsin Valley Fair, the concert bands of Marathon County, and the women's suffrage movement of central Wisconsin. You can see his presentations also on Facebook. Ben Clark will now cover some of the early years of the suffragist movement in Marathon County. Please welcome Ben Clark.
Mr. Clark, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. I might need to be, oh, great, good.
Yep, your presentation is
Looks like
being
that's working.
displayed.
Great. Let me just, nope. There we go. Okay, yeah, thank you. Nope. There we go. Yeah, thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about the local story here of the suffrage movement, which resulted in women voting 100 years ago this year. So Donna was kind enough to introduce me. She actually, probably about a year ago, was one of many people who contacted the Historical Society and asked us whether we were doing something to celebrate the anniversary. And it's a question that we get not necessarily specifically about the anniversary, but about the suffrage movement in general, from county board members down to middle school kids looking for help with a research project or for History Day. And the interesting thing is it's kind of difficult to answer that question, because we do certainly have women here from this era that were very important in the development of the community as leaders and other figures. However, we don't really have the sort of women's suffragette that we look for. These sort of images that you look for, the white dress marching in the streets with signs and placards demanding the right to vote. That doesn't necessarily happen here, as far as we can tell. Nobody's marching down 3rd Street to the courthouse, or getting on a soapbox and speaking at the fair or anything like that, as far as we can tell. And that's the story that then whenever we get asked this question, and certainly in getting into the history here from the 100 years since the 19th Amendment, I started looking at this and said, well, this is an interesting story in and of itself. Why don't we have women that step up as leaders as we do in other areas of life in Wisconsin? Because that's kind of the expectation that I got. But then I found this article, which basically it's an article from 1887, talking about a suffrage meeting in Schofield, in which there were men and women that got together, mostly from Wausau and Schofield, but they had some friends from Grand Rapids that came up, which is going to be eventually renamed Wisconsin Rapids. And they were celebrating Susan B. Anthony's 67th birthday. And they had, songs that they were singing, suffrage songs. They had some food. They read from Susan B. Anthony's biography. And this was a shock. And as I kind of kept digging, I found that actually there's some evidence to show that there was a Marathon County Women's Suffrage Association that was formed in 1879. But we don't really know much about the people that were involved or, that sort of thing. So, again, doing the due diligence as a historian, I looked at the names here and picked out, we'll just pick at them and see if there's any threads that come loose. And in the story that I want to tell you about today is actually one of those stories. It's Almedia Gray, who turns out to be a really important suffrage leader during her time, not just here in Marathon County, but across the whole of Wisconsin. So this is back to the 1850 census. There she is as a 17-year-old boarding at William Schofield's boarding house. 1850 is when Marathon County gets created. So this is like very early on. And we know it's going to be in what is going to become Schofield because it's William Schofield's mill. But she's there along with John Gray, who they're going to meet and get married shortly thereafter. Kind of hard to say. They don't have a great church records or official records back in 1850, but presumably they do get married because they have children shortly after this. And they're going to go on to become very important as business people. John Gray is going to have a mill down in what's going to become Kronenwetter. And by the 1880s, hopefully you can kind of see this. This is the area, the land that they own, which is pretty extensive. And it's interesting because I say they, because this yellow bit, again, hopefully you can kind of see that there, is actually owned by A.B. Gray, which is not John, but Almedia Gray, which is interesting because she owns land at a time when you generally didn't see that unless, husband passed away and they just inherited it. Women didn't own land back in the 1880s. But also she does never, as far as I can tell, she never uses the name Mrs. John Gray. She is just A.B. Gray. If she uses a Mrs., it's Mrs. A.B. Gray. So this is a very unusual woman during this period in time. And we don't know a whole lot about her life here at this point, but we do know that she was getting involved in the temperance movement, which is the movement it's going to result in prohibition later on, removing alcohol from society. And through those sort of contacts throughout the state, she ends up getting involved in the formation of the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association back in 1882. And she's not just there, she is actually a leader. She is the chairman of the executive committee that year. So she is right at the forefront. Now, she doesn't stay a leader. She actually kind of gives up the mantle to Reverend Olympia Brown of Racine, who is an amazing woman in her own right and would run this organization as the head for the next 30 years, through some good times and bad times, but certainly very charismatic speaker. And Almedia Gray steps into the role of financing it. So she goes in and makes sure that they have the money to do what they're planning on doing, which is to create some legislation to give women the vote. And as we know, it's going to take a while before the nation gets there. But in certain places like Wisconsin, we do have limited suffrage for women. So, for example, in 1887, after a referendum that they sponsored, women got the chance to vote in school elections. They had a partial suffrage. So, for example, this is an article from Stevens Point showing that the women were voting. There's 89 women that took part, which is about a third of the total voters here. So this bill that they pushed through was specifically giving women the vote in issues of school matters, which I think they felt was a little bit more palatable than, women voting for judges or the county sheriff or the president of the United States, because women were very much involved in the education of children. And so here you go. But this bill that got passed and gave women partial suffrage, in which women voted here in 1887, I should say, I don't know if anything happened here in Marathon County. It's kind of strange to see how this is implemented. In some places, they just don't do it. And in some places, they give women full suffrage. It kind of depends on the community. It's something that I hope to dig into in the near future to learn more about. But anyway, here they are voting. So the unfortunate thing, though, is that it is just school suffrage. And Olympia Brown and Elmedia Gray and sort of the group of these women at the WWSA, they want more. They want full suffrage. And so basically it leads to a lawsuit where they try to expand this by arguing that school matters is a very broad distinction, and, you know, county board may not be specifically overseeing schools, but county boards, city councils, state senators, they have an influence on the education system through setting policy, through funding. And this initially kind of works out, but the state Supreme Court in early 1888 kind of puts a stop to that. They intervene and say it's too broad of an interpretation of the law. And they basically put this on ice until 1901, when they sort of rediscover the fact that on the books, women can vote in school elections. And so after 1901, they make some legislative changes to make it so that there are separate ballots, so that you know, women only get the elections that they're allowed to, or deemed, you know, okay for them to vote in. And this is kind of an important thing in that it legitimizes and normalizes the idea of women going to the polls, you know, even if it is just to vote for, you know, the school superintendent, which there wasn't a whole lot of competition at this point. But still, that kind of helps out and certainly had an effect on sort of the social understanding of women voting later on. It's also interesting that because of this gap in the timeline, you know, in which women can vote in 1887, but not until 1902, we don't really recognize the importance of, you know, our Schofield suffragist here, Elmedia Gray, and the people that she surrounded herself. Because in 1889, the following year, she leaves for Los Angeles, California. Not entirely sure exactly what the reasons for that was, but she did. And she continues to join the cause. She actually, in 1904, there's a newspaper account of, apparently she was part of a group of women that got together and were talking about suffrage. And they get fired up and they end up going to the county courthouse, where they burst through the doors and they push themselves past the counter, where men were only allowed, no women were allowed. And they go over to the clerk and they start demanding the right to vote. And they say, under this reason, they just kind of go down the list that they had prepared. And apparently the clerk didn't know how to react to this, and was only saved when a court reporter showed up and started taking some pictures. When the ladies behind Elmedia Gray decided, kind of lost their nerve and left. And seeing that everything was moving, apparently Elmedia's last words to the clerk before she left was, "You should consider yourself to be fortunate because we didn't even get halfway through the arguments we had ready." So, a very interesting woman, and I don't know, who knows if, as far as I can tell, we don't have any evidence to say that she was, you know, knocking on the clerk's door in Wausau at the courthouse trying to vote back in the 1880s. But certainly this sort of tactic had some success, because in 1911, women voted in California. They got full suffrage. And sure enough, here she is in 1911 registering to vote there. And as far as I know, she dies in 1921. Kind of hard to pin that down specifically, but she would have been alive for the passage of the 19th Amendment, which would have given the right for women to vote in her old home of Marathon County. And it's interesting because this passage in 1911 and some other sort of Western states that were given the ability to vote to women in their state inspired in Wisconsin a referendum attempt. Again, in 1912, they put this referendum out to give women the vote. You know, is this something that's going to happen? And it fails. But it's very kind of interesting in how it does fail, because in 1912, you know, 37%, only 37% agreed with the idea of women voting. But it's not equal, because there are places like Marathon County here. It's not particularly popular. Only 23% of the population thinks that that's a good thing. And it's interesting, you know, going back to the sort of the beginning of why is this the case? You know, why don't we have, you know, Elmedia Gray obviously leaves. So why isn't there other women who step up to take those leadership positions? And I think there's a couple things that are going on. One is the fact that there's a lot of Germans here. This is just a great comparison here of these two maps. Germans don't really like suffrage for complicated reasons that I won't get into here. But mostly it's because it's associated and politicized along with the same group of people who are saying we should take away all the alcohol. And the Germans do love their beer and wine, and so that kind of doesn't help. But I think also maybe more to the point of the realities of women here. It's not that there weren't women that were taking an active role in the community. It's just that the role that they were taking was a little less obvious. They weren't marching down the street, but they were having an impact in various other ways, which is often kind of how you have to make change when you don't have agency like that. If you can't vote out somebody who doesn't agree with or helps your the people that you represent, well, then maybe you have to find more subtle, incremental ways to make change, and that's kind of what we end up seeing here. But unfortunately, that's not a easy story just to pitch to a middle schooler looking for a subject for her History Day presentation. So it's complicated, it's interesting, but at least now as we I can present this to you, we have the story of Elmedia Gray and the other people within her circle in Schofield that we can point out in the future. So with that, I will. That's my presentation that I prepared.
Well, thank you, Mr. Clark. Is there anybody have questions for Mr. Clark? Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I was wondering about Almeida Gray leaving this area, and I think when you did a previous presentation, you mentioned that her husband followed her to California like a year or 2 years later. Wasn't there something that the women's right to vote was voted down in the area, and then she left Wisconsin soon after that?
Yeah, that goes back to the partial suffrage that they had. So in 1888, there was, I kind of breezed over this, but there was a whole court battle that went to the state Supreme Court. And that's what ended up kind of putting it on hold until separate ballots could be established. And I think during that, because she was the person in charge of the finances, court cases to the Supreme Court are not cheap. And I think that kind of, I don't have any concrete proof of this, but my guess is that probably put a strain on her relationship with the other suffragists. And ultimately, yes, she did leave. She didn't have as much land here, but her husband had quite a bit of land that he had to stick around and deal with before he could join her. But that would have been just a few years later.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, I want to thank Mr. Clark for a great presentation on the actual local involvement in the women's suffrage and especially commemorating the anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So we will move on, and again, thank you, Mr. Clark, for the great presentation. We'll move on now to item 8C, a review by the administrator of the 2021 county budget. I invite the administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This presentation today is actually going to be a joint presentation with HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson. I'll start the presentation, and then Chair Robinson will take over. So I'm going to, as Chair Gibbs alluded to, I'm going to begin by going over what had been the administrator's proposed budget, and that was included in your packet. Chair Robinson will provide some additional context on the discussions of that budget at the HR Finance and Property Committee meeting, including an amendment that was offered at the committee and made to the budget. And he'll also provide you a description of kind of the next steps with respect to the budget. So with that, I'll begin, and I want to start by saying thank you to the staff that assisted in the presentation of this budget. It says it's the administrator's proposed budget, and certainly that's required by statute, but this was really a team effort, as every budget is. Christy Palmer, Chris Buskirk in finance, Molly Adzik, Mary Palmer in administration, and then also Ben Kromholtz from the library really assisted in the final product that you have before you. But I really can't say enough about the department heads and the finance staff within each of our departments that really did the hard work of putting together the information that that you see in the document that's in your packet that's before you today. As I'll explain later, their work really began several months ago, and I can't say enough again about the dedication that they demonstrated and really the challenge that was put in front of them. And I just want to start with two specific instances where I think that really demonstrates them rising to the challenge. So the general theme that I presented to the departments, and perhaps a better way is, again, demonstrate it or refer to it rather as the challenge that I presented to departments, was to come in with a flat budget. No tax levy increase over their 2020 budgets. But that challenge was a little bit more complex than simply saying a flat budget. I actually challenged them to come in with a flat budget while also accounting for and absorbing the entire cost of the merit pay increases that are within the proposed budget in their pre-existing tax levy allocation. So stated differently, as I'll talk about later, the 2.3% merit compensation increase that we are budgeting for in 2021, each of your department heads and their respective teams brought forth a budget that funded that internally with existing resources, and nevertheless also came in as a flat budget. Now, so that's quite a heavy lift, and they really were up to that task. Again, the guiding principle there is our financial situation is one of uncertainty, particularly as it relates to state aids moving forward in the second half of 2021. So they did a fantastic job in that respect. And the second instance I'll talk more about later relates to healthcare costs. As I indicated, our budget work really began months ago, and healthcare costs are a significant driver in the budget, and though the departments have to factor those in, again, when they're developing their budget. So I'll get into this more in detail later, but the short story is in late September, we were nearly complete with the budget. In fact, the departments had submitted their budgets, and we got really great news, which after considerable work with our healthcare provider, we were able to secure additional reductions in those rates, those renewal rates. Again, that's very positive news for taxpayers in Marathon County. It's great news for our operating budget. It is a lot of extra work after you've submitted your final budget to go back and essentially redo that budget with those updated numbers. And again, our department heads and their financial staff and our finance department was really up to the task, and they did a great job. So I just wanted to start with that because, again, this is really a team effort as it relates to the budget. So today, I'm not going to go through and go particularly in order through every page of the budget. I will try to go linearly through it and hit the highlights, but you have the 50-page document in your packet. You can read through it, and if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Or if you have questions after today's presentation, again, send me an email, give me a call at any time, and I'll certainly walk you through what my thought process was in developing this budget. But when I do go through the budget in that linear fashion, I'm hoping to answer three general questions for you. First and foremost, you'll see in the budget that our budget is increased about $9.5 million from 2020 to a total of $180 million. And I want to explain to you kind of what accounts for that, generally speaking, and what does that mean for individual taxpayers. The second goal I have in making the presentation today are really go through what the general cost drivers, the big cost centers of our budget, what are they? And then lastly, because a budget is at its core a financial planning document based on a series of assumptions, I want to discuss with you briefly what are the areas within the 2021 budget that, in my estimation, are most at risk. Stated differently, what assumptions that form the basis of the 2021 proposed budget are most likely to ultimately be inaccurate. So those are the three goals I have in going over the document with you today. And I'm going to begin by asking you to flip to page 24, and 24 of the budget document, which I believe is actually page 27 of your packet. So I'm violating my first statement, which said I was going to go linearly, but that is the document you'll see up on the screen, or the page rather up on the screen that again shows that our budget this year is balanced as required, and the total budget amount is at $180 million, nearly $181 million, which, as I indicated before, is an increase of over approximately $9.5 million from the 2020 proposed budget. If you actually look at previous budgets, and they're all available online through our finance department webpage, what you see is that there is a fair amount of fluctuation in annual budgets over that time period that are available. But what is fairly consistent is the breakdown that you see on the screen in terms of our revenues and expenses, where the money comes in, and the services that we provide, how we spend those dollars. The short answer with respect to the $9.5 million increase is that it's not $9.5 million of new money that you might otherwise think about when you're talking about a budget. And I know all of you have a strong understanding of levy limits, the concept of levy limits and what they mean for county government, but I want to start with a discussion there because I think it's helpful in grounding us. The net new levy we have in the form of net new construction levy is about $961,992. That is new money that is allowed for under levy limits. When you add together that amount plus the new tax levy that we get from a recent closure of a tax increment district in the county, and the levy associated with bridge aid, the total new levy, new dollars, amounts to $1,331,254, so $1.3 million. The other components of that $9.5 million increase relative to budget are comprised of several things. The first one that I'll discuss is really increases relative to capital improvement related funding. And capital improvement funding is again set forth in your packet. It is on page 28. You'll see that this year we're having $4.2 million transferred into the capital improvement program. Again, this is not new money. It's essentially a balanced transfer within the various budgets and funds operated by the county, not new money. That is an increase over previous years relative to capital improvement, and you'll see that on page 28. So not new revenue, but really a budget transfer. Similarly, we have several other examples of that comprise that increase of $9.5 million that exists within departments. A good example is the Central Wisconsin Airport, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the later in the budget, but Central Wisconsin Airport is going to, in 2021, they're going to be doing a significant amount of planning relative to future capital improvement work, including a runway decoupling project that they'll be moving forward with. So we have a transfer of almost $1.4 million from reserves to fund that engineering and other planning work. The runway decoupling project, which is again is going to span several years, my recollection is in excess of $16 million. So again, a budget transfer of $1.4 million, accounting for a portion of that $9.5 million increase, not new money. We anticipate being reimbursed by the federal government for those outlays from reserves to fund that $1.4 million. No tax levy in 2021 is going into the Central Wisconsin Airport operations. No tax levy has gone into operations for numerous years. The revenues and expenses, however, at the airport have gone up over time. So again, another example of our budgets increasing, but not having an impact on tax levy. Special education, is another example of a department accounting for a portion of that $9.5 million increase. Special education is not, Marathon County Special Education is not a traditional department. No levy, tax levy goes into traditional special education services. Those services are funded by the school districts that are served by Marathon County Special Education. That said, the special education budget in 2021 will be $1.9 million, a little in excess of $1.9 million more than 2020, due to increased funding from those school districts, as well as increased funding relative to additional work being done at special ed. So again, no tax levy, not $2 million of new money coming into Marathon County to deliver services. Intergovernmental service agreements account for another portion of that increase. The best example of that I can give is our work through the Highway Department on behalf of the state of Wisconsin. We perform routine maintenance on state highways. So if you think about road maintenance, snow plowing activities, our cost to do that work has gone up year over year due to increased costs of compensation for employees, increased fuel costs, increased costs for salt. The state of Wisconsin's agreement with Marathon County and all counties in the state of Wisconsin that provide those services calls for a dollar for dollar reimbursement for those activities. So while our budget goes up, it's not, again, new money in the traditional sense. And then the last component that I'll talk about relative to that $9.5 million, we do have $54,000 that we are budgeting of increased revenue over 2020 as it relates to sales tax. That's again, that there's a graph within your packet that shows that. So that is similar to tax levy in terms of net new construction. Those are new dollars that we are projecting to come into Marathon County through sales tax. So with that explanation of how do we get to that $9.5 million increase, what does that really mean for the Marathon County taxpayer? What are they going to see with this proposed budget? The tax rate in Marathon County, the simple answer is the tax rate actually goes down 18 cents. That, again, you all understand this better than most. That's a function of levy limits. That is how Wisconsin's levy limits require us to do business. The tax rate drops to $4.53. Again, that's that 18-cent decrease over 2020, which was $4.71. You'll see that the average homeowner in Marathon County, and I'm highlighting that on the screen, the average homeowner in Marathon County ultimately sees a $17.01 increase on their tax bill. And it's a fair question to ask. Well, Lance, you just indicated that the tax rate went down 18 cents. How is an individual's tax bill likely to increase? And my response to you would be, you are absolutely correct. Again, a function of how levy limits are calculated and how equalized value works within our Wisconsin tax system. You'll see that while the tax rate decreased by that 18 cents, we had a very significant 6.56% increase in equalized value. So for the average homeowner, you'll see that their property value increased from $158,756 in 2020 to $169,170 in 2021. Their tax bill does go up by that $17.01. However, their overall home value went up $10,414. So it's a relatively complex calculation, but if the question is asked, Did taxes go up or down? Both answers are technically correct. The tax rate dropped by 18 cents, but the average homeowner is going to see a slight increase in their tax bill due to a function of a significantly greater increase in equalized value than the drop in the overall tax rate. If you actually go back, and you can see we include a historical chart here demonstrating the, by budget year, the property value and tax rate. If you go back to 2001 in Marathon County, the tax rate was $6.21. Levy limits were instituted in the state of Wisconsin on, with respect to county budgets in 2005. At that time, our tax rate here in Marathon County was $5.79. Essentially in 2021, if we had the opportunity to raise the tax rate by 1 cent, that would equate to approximately $115,000 of new levy that would come into the county. The cumulative effect, well, I should say the annual effect of, in 2021, of levy limits being imposed since 2005, is that our tax levy, our overall budget, is $14.49 million lower than what it would have been had we essentially maintained the tax rate from 2005. That's irrespective of inflation. So you can see that over time, the levy limits have done what certainly the intent of the levy limits was to do, which is to drive down that tax rate in the state of Wisconsin. Our rate, just for your own edification, if you look at the Wisconsin Counties Association Green Book, has a great deal of really relevant information within it as it relates to county business. Our tax rate, our property tax levy rate in Marathon County in 2020 was well below the median of the counties in the state of Wisconsin. That median value was $5.20. So I hope that accomplishes my first goal of explaining to you, from a high level position, what does that $9.5 million increase in the budget really look like, and what does that mean for the average taxpayer in Marathon County? Moving on to the cost centers or cost drivers within the Marathon County budget. Really, those begin on page 6. There's a lot of good information between that I'm skipping over, and I encourage you all to read it. But moving on to look at cost drivers or cost centers of our budget, they begin in earnest on page 6 before the conclusion of the budget message, which is a departmental summary. But beginning, one of our primary drivers is staffing. And in my mind, when I talk about staffing, those are the people that do the work on behalf of the county board to serve the citizens of Marathon County. Staffing costs are really comprised, and you'll see this in various sections of the budget. New positions have a significant portion of that. A good rule of thumb that I like to use for a new position is that salary and benefits is about $75,000 total cost with any new position. Now, certainly there's a range there, but a good rule of thumb to start with for calculations is $75,000. So when you talk about adding a new position, we really need to make sure that we're doing that in a sustainable way. And I spend a fair amount of time talking about new positions in this section, as well as in the departmental overviews that are within your budget. But we had 5.40 requests in terms of FTE, full-time equivalents, that were submitted by departments in Marathon County. I can say without hesitation, all of those requests were needed, and they would, Marathon County taxpayers, residents, would be well served if we were able to fund all of those requests. Again, the environment in which we built this budget based on the assumptions that were approved by the HR, Finance, and Property Committee, we really wanted to make sure we were sustainable. Not that in a normal year you don't, but we really wanted to be conservative in our approach. Ultimately, as you'll see from this page, and I'll talk about later, we approved technically two new positions, But what those amounted to was really an upgrade of one position from a certain pay level to another that is going to be fully funded by an external intergovernmental contract. And a second position was upgraded from 0.60 to 0.75, so a 0.15 position increase that again is going to be fully funded due to priorities within the department. They're going to locate the funds within their budget to account for that increase. I talk about in each of the departmental summaries later in the budget, those departments that requested new positions that I did not fund, I tried to spend a significant amount of time explaining my decision in that regard. But certainly staffing is in the term of new positions, is a budget cost center. The other piece as it relates to staffing is employee health insurance. And I already alluded to this in my opening comments about the work done by department heads, but employee health insurance, healthcare costs for every entity, every business, every nonprofit, and certainly every governmental entity, they are a significant cost center, and Marathon County is no different. We've been largely fortunate over the last 10 plus years with respect to our healthcare increase costs, but the last 2 years we've had experiences similar to other businesses and other governments. And you'll see at the bottom of this page, page 9, I think the adage is accurate. In 2018, Kyle Christensen from the Wisconsin Counties Association explained that 60 of 72 counties would experience higher increase in the cost of employee health insurance than the state-imposed levy caps will allow them to take in the form of new levy. So again, I'm just going to say that again. In 2018, 60 of 72 counties, the new money that I referenced before, that new tax levy that counties are allowed to take in based on levy limits, 60 of 72 counties, their healthcare costs increased by more than the amount of the new levy they were able to take in 2018. So that's an environment that causes counties to have to make difficult decisions, and we had to make some of those difficult decisions last year, and I talk about those in this section, and we also had to make some difficult decisions this year. I'm very proud of the work that our employee resources staff did working with our health insurance provider. Quite honestly, I think we have a plan that not only maintains quality, but arguably improves the quality that we're going to provide to staff, and does it at a lower increase in cost than what we were initially quoted. Our initial renewal cost came back at 12%. We built our budget on the assumption we could get that down to 9%, and we were able to do that, but we got additional, in working diligently with our provider, Group Health Trust, we were able to get that increase amount down to 6.5%, which sounds great, and it is. But that 6.5% increase is still $773,000 of an increase in 2021. Our new healthcare budget is just shy of $13 million. So health insurance is extremely important, making sure that we're on a sustainable path. And as you see in my summary here, I really think in 2021, we've been with Group Health Trust for a number of years. We were previously self-funded. And this is not an indictment of Group Health Trust in any way. I think we've received excellent service, but I think we owe it to the taxpayers of Marathon County to really examine all available options to see if there is a better strategy, a better path on which we can place ourselves to control those sizable costs moving forward. So that's one of the chief pieces of work, and you'll see that in the departmental summaries for the Employee Resources Department. It's one of the chief pieces of work I think needs to be on the administration work plan in 2021. Lastly, as it relates to staffing, compensation is certainly a budget cost center. You'll see in my summary here, the Marathon County total county payroll for 2021 is north of $67.5 million. That should not, I don't think that's surprising to anyone in terms of, if you look at the work that we do in our overall budget, a lot of our work is delivered by frontline staff, and the cost of payroll is again, is a driver for not only Marathon County, but all county budgets. This year, one of the things I'm most proud about in the budget is the work that we did to really invest in what I think is our greatest asset, and that is our employees. If you read previous budget messages over the last several years, we have pretty consistently budgeted 2% for employee compensation increases. Quite simply, that has not kept pace with local governments. That has not kept pace certainly with the private market. And attracting and retaining talent is one of those things that for any entity, private business, nonprofit, and government is extremely important to your long-term success. We have services being delivered, high-quality services, important services being delivered to the people of Marathon County, and they're being delivered by frontline staff, and it behooves us to make sure that we have a compensation plan that is externally competitive. We need to continue to draw in the highest quality staff we can, and again, quite honestly, 2%, as it's noted in the previous budget messages over the last several years, really is not sufficient to do that in a sustainable way. So in 2021, we budgeted for 2.3% increase in compensation. That's a step in the right direction. Is it as much as I would have hoped? No, but again, I think it's a meaningful investment, particularly as we're tackling uncertain financial future. We look at the second half of 2021 with state aids that I'll talk about later. It's an important step, and again, I'm very proud that we're able to do that so that we can, again, take a step and make sure that we are remaining externally competitive. We do a lot of things outside of employee compensation to make Marathon County government a preferred place to work. We spend a lot of time and energy around professional development. We do a lot of work internally around culture and making sure that, again, Marathon County, people enjoy coming to work because it is hard work. Much of the work that we have people doing is high stress, particularly now. We're serving vulnerable populations, so it's very important, and making sure we allocate an appropriate amount to employee compensation is an important step, but it is a cost center. So staffing and compensation are one of our primary cost centers as it relates to the budget. Moving forward, at the bottom of page 12, you'll see highway, paving, and bridge programs. Certainly, that's one of the programs where we have expenses, significant expenses in that department outside of payroll. Payroll is a significant expense, but also that department, they buy a lot of materials. They expend a lot of fuel. They do a lot of work that requires the use of other capital. So you'll see we're planning on spending $6.4 million on highway paving. I provide a little bit of a breakdown for you on the specific work that the highway department at the direction of the infrastructure committee is moving forward with in 2021. But I'm going to start by, again, asking you to think about your green book that you have, that you received from the Wisconsin Counties Association, and kind of why this is important. And Chair Robinson will talk more about it after I wrap up. But Marathon County has 1,228 lane miles of county highway. That is by far the most in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, it is more than double the average of the counties in the state. At the same time, when you look at that green book, you'll see that highway funding per capita in Marathon County is $1 above the lowest quartile range of the counties in the state of Wisconsin. And we are in the lowest quartile with respect to state aids. So it's extremely important, and I think our highway department has done a great job trying to maintain that asset, which is the system of roads. In Marathon County, those 1,200 plus miles of roads, they've done a great job of doing that in financially prudent way, but that is a heavy lift, and we need to adopt a more long-term vision with respect to our roadway system, and you'll see that that is one of the things I have noted in the departmental summaries. I also talk about it a bit in this summary. But needless to say, even without that long-term strategy that we certainly need to work on in 2021, funding for highway and bridge maintenance is a significant cost center within the Marathon County budget. Moving forward, you'll see another cost center, and I like to think about these as either a cost center that is programmatic in nature or one that is capital in nature. So the highway and bridge projects, that's a capital. It's capital in nature. It's a capital budget driver. I'll get into some programmatic ones in a moment, but park department, small capital projects. I leave this in here not because it's a large amount of money and a true cost center, but I think it really demonstrates an attempt by Marathon County to be sustainable. This is a process or a practice we put in place a couple of years ago, and that is to set aside $100,000 in each budget to, in effect, take on small capital projects within our park system. Similar to our roadway system, we are very fortunate to have a vast park and forest system in Marathon County. That said, with that system, we need to make sure we're making timely investments into those assets so as to ultimately not forego small maintenance and leave yourself with a more significant bill later in the future. So again, not a cost center in terms of significant funds. It's only $100,000 that we set aside, but I thought it was important to keep that reference in the budget narrative, because as it follows the highway and paving section, it really demonstrates what I think is a more sustainable financial planning approach. That is making sure you're setting aside enough money to maintain the asset. Moving forward, StartRight, and this has been included in quite a number of budget narratives over the past several years, so I continued to have a summary of that programmatic cost driver. And again, the reason I include it, it's not capital in nature, but it is a program, and it's one of the larger programs in terms of Marathon County as it relates specifically to budget dollars and tax levy associated with that program. So you'll see that tax levy, it's really a partnership, this program, but between Marathon County in terms of tax levy contribution and contributions from grants and local foundations, as well as Badger Care funding. $1.1 million relative to the program is from tax levy, just shy of $500,000 from those other funding sources. Really in 2020, we saw what I think, and I note in this narrative is often been overlooked in terms of one of the benefits of having this program. We talk, Health and Human Services has looked at this program a lot, and there's been a lot of discussion about the benefits, the long-term benefits, really the return on the investment, the long-term return on investment of this program. But we haven't often talked about a benefit that stems from having multiple public health nurses that are capable and trained to assist during a pandemic. Our public health nurses that typically deliver StartRight have been an extreme asset in our pandemic response, as I note in the final paragraph on page 14, really leading that frontline response. That said, the StartRight program in 2020, in the 2020 budget discussions, I should say, there was a desire expressed to really dive down and look at that return on investment that Marathon County is receiving from that program. And I think it's important to note, and I make reference to this in the Health Department budget summary, we do have a plan. We have requested assistance from the University of Wisconsin through the university program to do that return on investment analysis as it relates to StartRight, making sure that we're operating that program in a way such that we are receiving that significant return on investment that the program began with. Broadband expansion, again, not really a cost center in terms of overall funding in 2020 in the budget. We allocated $56,000 to broadband expansion to assist us in doing some planning and staffing work. In 2021, the proposed budget that was forwarded to the HR Finance and Property Committee did provide, at the direction of that committee, $250,000 be set aside in the capital improvement plan, and you'll see that in the proposed budget for potential use as a source of matching funds for broadband expansion, which again is certainly more funds than we've put forward in any other budget. Like I said, in 2020, the budget allocation was $56,000. Nonprofit organizations, again, really more of a programmatic cost center than a capital one. The funding of nonprofits has been a topic of discussion for long before my time in administration. And in the 2020 budget, there were policy decisions made to move forward with the progressive reduction of funding for certain nonprofits. Those are set forth on the left side of the chart in the budget message. While other nonprofits, their funding was maintained at their previous, I'll say their 2019 level, and those are set forth on the right, with the exception of the Judicare mediation program. That was a new program that was funded as part of the 2020 budget. So overall, you'll see that historically Marathon County had funded just about $500,000 was allocated to nonprofits annually through the budget process. You'll see the reductions on the left for those delineated nonprofits that are having their funding progressively reduced. Essentially, it's a reduction of $62,500 cumulatively from each of those nonprofits on an annual basis, with all of those nonprofits essentially having their full funding reduced in the next 2 years. In terms of another programmatic budget cost center, adult detention facility, jail census, really the way that I like to look at that is it's correctional housing costs. All told, our correctional costs, if you look at running and operating our jail, housing inmates inside our jail, outside our jail, the transport costs associated with external inmate housing, the medical costs, all told, we spend annually about approximately $8 million on correctional housing costs. Housing inmates out of county housing Marathon County inmates in other county jails, that funding amount has historically exceeded $1 million. The capacity of our jail, generally speaking, is 279. We like to keep that a little bit below that level so that you have the opportunity to flex. So we like to keep it around 250. But simply put, this is a very significant programmatic cost center in Marathon County, our correctional costs within our justice system. And I want to reference that idea a little bit in this discussion, and that is criminal justice system. I make note in the narrative that our jail census is really the product of numerous factors within that public safety system, with numerous stakeholders and players, judges, the DA's office, community corrections, commonly referred to as probation, parole, our Justice Alternatives Department, North Central Healthcare, and numerous other law enforcement agencies. So to achieve any meaningful reduction in jail census is going to take and has taken the considerable collaboration of all of those stakeholders and partners that I referenced before. And I do go in some detail in this narrative portion, indicating that we've had some success through the evidence-based decision-making group in implementing some of those initiatives in our justice system to improve functioning within the justice system. And some of those have led to a reduction in jail sentence, or contributed, I should say, to a reduction in our jail census. If you look at the data from from previous years, and that's on, you'll see on page 19 of the packet, we had a pretty significant drop from 2017, 2018 to 2019 in terms of jail census, going from just about 400 to 355. That's a significant drop, and if you look this year, year to date, we're at 294. Again, a significant drop, which equates to a significant cost savings when you consider that our average cost to house an inmate generally ranges from $38 a day to up to about $45 a day, depending on the facility. That's just the housing cost. That doesn't include transport or jail medical, but nevertheless, you get a sense for the costs we're dealing with. If you look at the data from the first part, or I should say really from April to August of this year, as I note in the narrative, you see even a more striking reduction in jail census. And in fact, I underline in bold that statement. During that 5-month period, our average census was 269, approximately 86 fewer inmates per day from our 2019 average. So a significant potential cost savings if we're able to maintain even a portion of that reduction. That said, and I think it's really important to note, we cannot focus our efforts on jail census and lose sight of our commitment to delivering public safety. And we're very fortunate, our sheriff, our district attorney's office, and our courts, they understand that. We need to work collaboratively to pursue evidence-based strategies to make sure we have the people in the jail that need to be there to maintain public safety. But I do think it's important to continue to look at what are the opportunities we have to continue to capitalize on the savings that we're talking about if we're able to maintain, again, even a portion of those. And one strategy that I reference in this narrative, and I also reference in the departmental summaries, is this idea of system budgeting. Recently, it was explained to me that our criminal justice system is similar to a balloon. And the idea being that if you stress one area, if you squeeze one portion of that balloon, or if you change one portion of our justice system, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with that balloon, right? It goes to another area. And my example in having this conversation with a law enforcement professional that they provided was, if we have our court system and our district attorney's office do a lot of process improvement around things like improving the speed with which cases go into our criminal justice system and progress through our criminal justice system, we're going to see benefits in our jail budget, right? If cases are moving more quickly, if we're making sure we have the right people in our jail, the efforts of the DA, the efforts of the sheriff's office, and the efforts of the judges will manifest themselves through savings in the sheriff's office budget. Now, that's all well and good, but it doesn't really incentivize that collaboration in a meaningful way. I think there's additional ways we can do that. So stated differently, and you'll see this in the budget departmental summaries, the sheriff's office is going to be implementing the use of body cameras in 2021. Those are funded in the proposed budget. And there are countless reasons why that is a very good idea. Quite honestly, it's great from an evidentiary perspective, but it's the right thing to do. We need to do that to maintain transparency in policing and to maintain public confidence in our justice system. Our sheriff has been an advocate. Our DA's office understands that, and it's provided for in your budget. That said, and the DA's office has made this point, someone's got to watch that footage. when those cases go into the criminal justice system. And so that's, again, a demonstration of that balloon analogy, right? You're changing the workings of our criminal justice system, and that manifests itself in those other departments. So we need to find what I referred to in this budget narrative. We need to find a way to have a more of a system budgeting approach. I don't know what that looks like, but at this point, what I think that starts to look like is that, again, you look at the budget as a total, as a system, and then the partners determine how best to allocate resources within that system. I had a preliminary meeting with the district attorney, with the sheriff, and with the clerk of court, and that was a really positive meeting. I think there's support for looking at how to do that because they all understand better than most how that system works. The next cost center in the budget, similar to the costs we have with the housing of adult inmates, we spend a significant amount of money as it relates to providing care for children who are abused or neglected or are in our youth justice systems, specifically as it relates to placement of those children in out-of-home care. In 2021, we intend to spend, we are budgeting to spend just shy of $5.7 million on those youth placements. It's important to note that that is almost a $400,000 decrease over the amount that we are budgeting to spend in 2020. As I note, though, that strategy is not without risk. Placements of children in those sort of cases, abuse and neglect cases, or our youth justice cases, are not driven by budgets. They are driven by the needs of those children. That said, our social services professionals, our department head and her staff are confident that we can work to hit those targets. We've allocated resources, this board allocated resources, creating 2 positions under the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act, allocating funds for the creation of those individuals to work very diligently to keep children in their homes if safety allows us to do that, provide additional resources and supports. And also, those individuals would work to diligently and as quickly as possible, return those children to their homes, again, provided that it's safe to do that. So again, a significant amount of county tax levy and other funds goes to the housing of those children. Other cost centers, and these are again programmatic in nature, but they're those regional intergovernmental entities that Marathon County is a member within. I start with City County NCHC Technology Department, commonly referred to as CCITC. Our funding for that organization is increasing by 3.7% over our 2020 budget. That is a function of IT security costs, upgrades, software costs associated with transitioning to Office 365, and employee benefit costs within CCITC. I don't need to belabor the point. Information security is an absolute necessity. I think in the last year, you've probably read the stories if you've looked at the Wisconsin Counties Association magazine or the National Association of Counties publications, the number of governmental entities that have been the target of phishing or cyber security attacks has increased exponentially. And the cost, if you are ultimately victimized or held hostage, your data is compromised, is significant. So we need to make sure that we're investing in that technology. I do think it's important, and I noted in the narrative, Christy and I worked with CCITC and individual departments to make what I think is an important change in the way that we budget for software as it relates to department-specific software. There were numerous department-specific software costs that were housed within the CCITC budget. We changed that. We pulled the costs associated with those various pieces of software out of CCIT's budget and transferred those to the appropriate department. The thought process there being that departments really need to see and feel the cost of those department-specific softwares annually, so that they can evaluate whether the cost, the financial cost of the software, is outweighed by the benefit that the software confers upon the work of the department. When that cost is not borne directly by the department, our sense was you don't do that in a meaningful way. So that was an important, again, it doesn't show up in terms of cost savings within the budget, but I thought it was important to note that we made that change because I think long-term you'll see benefit from doing so. The Aging and Disability Resource Center of Central Wisconsin, referred to as the ADRCCW, that is a multi-county endeavor, Lincoln, Langlade, Marathon, and Wood County. The funding level, Marathon County's funding contribution has remained constant at the level that was set when that organization was formed. You see that there, $395,367. Adult Protective Services, we specifically called this out. Adult Protective Services funding, I should say Adult Protective Services, the work has been provided for Marathon County on our behalf by North Central Healthcare staff. You may recall over the last couple of years, there's been discussion really stemming from our work on the North Central Healthcare campus renovation project about transferring Adult Protective Services responsibility, again on behalf of Marathon County, transferring it from North Central Healthcare to the ADRC-CW because that work aligned more closely, with the mission of the ADRC. Those conversations have been ongoing. That said, the transfer has not happened yet. We still have a number of details that would need to be flushed out for that transfer to happen, and there's no guarantee that that will happen. So essentially what we did, rather than move the funding back to North Central, because we had, in 2020 in our budget, we anticipated this transfer already occurring, so we did move the money from North Central Healthcare to the ADRC. Well, lo and behold, the transfer hasn't been affected yet, so rather than move it back, we actually created an independent line item so that regardless of who is offering that service on our behalf, it's captured within the budget. Then lastly, I already referred to North Central Healthcare. The tax levy contribution in the proposed 2021 budget is the same amount that was proposed in 2020, just shy of $4.4 million. I provide you the breakdown of those various costs that are provided for within the North Central Healthcare proposed budget. Again, it is a flat budget from 2020. Some of the exact funding levels for the Marathon County specific programs, which are on the top of page 22, have changed slightly, but largely that is a consistent amount. And then I do note North Central Regional Planning, our funding for that membership continues at the same level of $43,000 as it's been for some time. And that membership fee allows not only Marathon County to participate in North Central Regional Planning, but it also allows all the municipalities within the county to seek out assistance from that organization. So I referenced the departmental summaries. That's a new feature that is within this budget, and I included that, again, to provide a little bit of context. We have historically provided a 5-year department comparison, so essentially looking at the last 5 years' budget for each individual department, and you see the percent change. We continue to do that. That is in your packet. However, in talking with Chair Gibbs and HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson, I'm not going to go through that today because as I made reference to before, some of the changes we made, I just referenced the change with respect to CCITC moving funds around, really isn't indicative of an actual expansion or contraction within a department. It's really just simply indicative of an accounting change. And there are several of those that might leave the wrong impression if I were just to work off that document. Instead, what I'm going to do is work off of the departmental summaries, and I will reference some of the significant changes you'll see. So the departmental summaries begin on page 35 of the budget message. And they begin with administration. I'll try to go relatively quickly here, but I'll try to hit on a couple of what I think are key features either in the 2021 budget or real future initiatives that I think we need to be mindful of moving forward. In the 2021 proposed budget, there is a $40,000 allocation for our involvement in the university year program. We don't know if it's going to cost $40,000. I would expect not. But we did, again, put that placeholder in the budget so that we do have a funding source should we need to utilize that for a lot of the various studies that we propose to the UW system. The big piece that I want to talk about moving forward, and there are a couple instances of this, and you've already seen some in calendar year 2020. Our focus in administration and working with our department heads has been one of increasing collaboration across departments and sharing staff to essentially and ultimately reduce cost. I think there's a significant opportunity in administration to do that in 2021, and I go into more detail here, but we have our incumbent employee resources director, Frank Mattel, has indicated he's going to be retiring in April of this coming year. He's certainly more than earned that. And I think with that, I've taken some time to think about how we can collaborate more closely between administration and employee resources, again, to share staff and essentially, ultimately, save tax levy resources. Our organizational excellence program manager in administration has the skills and background that I think would allow her to succeed and excel as the employee resources director, and it really allows us to bring together our organizational excellence program, which is aimed at professional development, organizational efficiency, and employee learning, really integrate that into employee resources, which makes fundamental sense in my view, and it certainly aligns well with the work we're doing around implementing a new enterprise resource program, an ERP, which is replacing our Kayenta system. So the timing could not honestly be better for us to do that. We can move that organizational excellence program manager into that position. I then can reallocate the resources to create a public communication specialist position, which has been identified as a significant need in Marathon County for numerous years. And in fact, it was identified by the county board in the 2016 comprehensive plan. And that position will really be a significant asset throughout the county. And as I indicated, all of this we can accomplish by reducing our tax levy between the two departments. So really a very significant opportunity within administration. And administration is also a good example of why that 5-year budget comparison might be a little bit misleading. If you look at that, it looks as though the county administration budget is going up by, I want to say, approximately 2% if you scroll later in the packet. But that's really a function of the 2020 budget pulled approximately $55,000 out of the administration budget to fund the nonprofits that I indicated previously that had their funding maintained. That $55,000 was used to do that, which in effect artificially decreased the budget of the administration department. We certainly have met that challenge by not hiring a replacement in the deputy position, but if you put that funding back in, the administration budget actually is down in excess of 1%. So another example of why that 5-year average or that 5-year comparison perhaps isn't as helpful as the narratives. Moving forward, the clerk of courts, I'll be very brief here. Two things on the horizon. We are set to get a 6th judgeship in Marathon County in August of 2021. With that, if we were to simply approach that as we're adding a judge, we need to add the court staff that normally come with a judge. We would be adding significant tax levy investment into those to fill those positions. I've had conversations with our clerk of court, our chief judge, and our presiding judge. It's going to be a heavy lift, but we're going to work diligently to service that 6th judge from a staffing perspective without adding staff. And then the last piece, I already referenced the system budgeting process. The clerk of courts would be an integral part in that planning. Conservation planning and zoning, again, I'll be very brief. They've done a great job in that department seeking out additional grant programs to maintain the services that we provide, essentially offsetting our levy investment. And they actually were successful in achieving some additional grants. I put in the narrative all of the various funding sources for that department just to, again, demonstrate to the board that they are very proactive in doing that. In terms of future efforts, they are the lead department with respect to our participation in the University Year Program. In 2021, we will have to undertake the onboarding of a new director following Becky Frisch's retirement earlier this year. We're in the midst of that recruitment at this time. And then you'll see this noted in a couple other areas in these departmental summaries. As you know, there's been discussion about a joint department, county department facility, essentially relocating the highway department, conservation planning and zoning, and park recreation and forestry to another location to better serve the residents of Marathon County. If that is to come to pass, conservation planning and zoning will certainly have a significant role in that planning for that move. Corporation Counsel's Office, the highlight from 2021 budget, this is the first annual budget that fully accounts for the full-time position that is hired in Marathon County, but as a county employee, but is really directly providing legal services to North Central Healthcare. Again, it's a great example of a department's budget increasing in terms of its overall budget, but that's being offset by revenue from North Central Healthcare essentially paying for that position. So it's coming at a tax levy neutral proposition. In terms of future efforts, I already referenced the position sharing between administration and employee resources. I think there's also an opportunity within Corporation Counsel's Office. Over the last several months, actually the last several years at HR Finance and Property, we've really spent a lot of time looking at our tax deed process, or I should say at least a lot of time talking about our tax deed process. I think it's really ripe for taking a holistic view of that and developing an approach that is more efficient. Right now, it's really going across 3 departments. It begins in the treasurer's office with delinquent taxes. The treasurer then starts the process with the assistance of Corporation Counsel when necessary to go through the taking of that property by tax deed. Essentially, as you work through that process, it ends up with the county clerk, and under our ordinances, she's charged with really working through the disbursement, the sale of those properties. I think there's an opportunity to do that more efficiently. Right now, in each of those 3 departments, it's not the priority work of any one of them. I think in working with Corporation Counsel, we can reallocate some staff time, staff energy to really make that a priority within that office. I don't have the final plan developed yet, but as noted, we will have that in the first quarter of 2021. I already referenced county clerk and county treasurer. DA's office, I spend a considerable amount of time talking about the district attorney's office budget. In short, Teresa Whetstone and her staff did a phenomenal job with respect to their budget. They were down, I believe, 1.5% in their overall tax levy request. That office has significant staffing needs. and I go through that in detail within that budget summary. Again, I think it really demonstrates the need for our justice system to develop a system budgeting approach that when we do make changes within the system and there are stresses that result in one department or multiple departments within that system, we need to make sure that we're making those changes in an intelligent, knowing way, and that then we develop a funding strategy to move forward with filling those needs. I also talk about integrating that office in the next several months into our Superion system. That's the law enforcement system that's been upgraded over the last over a year. The last phase of that, one of the last phases, is really bringing the DA's office, linking the state prosecution system, which is the PROTECT system, into that Superion law enforcement system. Hopefully, we should know later this month if that is successful, and the idea is, the hope is, the expectation is that that will alleviate some of the administrative work within one of the positions in that office. But that's another example of an important strategy to really combat the fiscal environment we have. We are also updating their reception area. You'll see from my budget narrative that in the last year's budget, the DA's office prioritized converting one of their positions from a reception position to a victim witness professional position. So we are renovating their front office space to really better suit the workflow of that office and also serve the public. The DA's office was very ambitious in offering up several suggestions for our university application. So if these are selected by UW-Madison staff, they will certainly be a lead with respect to projects around combating truancy and decreasing the number of young adults coming into our justice system through targeting adverse childhood experience risk factors. Teresa also was really instrumental in us including in that application the study of racial disparity in our justice system from the first point of police contact to completion of supervision. And lastly, which is really, I think, a significant undertaking, but really has potential to be extremely meaningful in terms of long-term cost savings, making sure that we are truly measuring what matters in our justice system, and that we have a IT infrastructure to capture that data without significant duplication of effort and share that information across our various departments so that we can gain insight from that data. Emergency management, this is perhaps the best indicator of why the 5-year budget averages are a little bit misleading. We took $400,000 out of Phil Rentmeester, our emergency management director's budget. That's a significant reduction. However, all we did was we moved it over to the sheriff's office because we're transferring the responsibility of budgeting for our radio system maintenance to the sheriff's office as opposed to emergency management. So we didn't actually save $400,000, but on the 5-year comparison, that is what it looks like. In terms of significant changes or highlights, I should say, within the emergency management budget, I've talked before about our efforts to enter into intergovernmental agreements. With Phil's leadership, we're gonna move forward with 2 of them, and I think they're really important because they're those sort of long-term strategies that if you don't think outside the box, you would never look at them, but they're really gonna be, again, from a long-term perspective, save us significant funds and ultimately increase the level of service provided to the people of Marathon County. The first is around our hazmat response. We are required to have a hazmat response team, a Team B, as it's referred to, and Phil manages those individuals. They essentially, it's paid volunteers, as much as that term is an oxymoron. They have staff that, again, they come in when necessary, which is exceedingly rare, but these are important, serious incidents when they do occur. So we need to make sure that those individuals are trained as required by state law and other regulations, which those regulations require a significant amount of training. So Phil is in essence spending a great deal of time making sure that this team is ready in the event of the need for us to respond to a hazardous materials release. In addition to the training portion of that responsibility, Phil also needs to maintain the equipment that the team would need. So vehicles, personal protective equipment. That equipment likewise is expensive. The city of Wausau operates its own hazardous materials team, a type 2 team, which actually is capable of responding. It has a higher level of training and certification than our type B team. They maintain all of their own certifications. They maintain staffing through a professional fire department, and they maintain their equipment. So talking with Phil and reaching out to the City of Wausau Fire Department, we are going to be entering into an agreement whereby we're essentially transferring the money that Marathon County was budgeting for our Team B response to the City of Wausau. That is, again, financially, it is a very easy decision. We are not going to have, we would have to take on significant cost in the next couple of years to replace a great deal of equipment. City of Wausau is going to take on that responsibility. They're going to take on all the responsibility relative to, again, staffing, maintaining staffing and training. This is a win-win across the board, really. It's City of Wausau, Marathon County benefit, and the people outside the City of Wausau are benefiting from that, again, that higher level of service that's available through that professional fire department. The second agreement that we're going to be working on really is going to allow for that upgrade of that emergency management administrative coordinator that I referenced in the new position discussion. It's being upgraded to an emergency management technician. That has been a longstanding need in Marathon County. It was one of the first meetings I took with a director of the state's emergency management team through WEM, Wisconsin Emergency Management. She made very clear, this was at the end of 2019, that, she encouraged me to look at opportunities to add some additional bandwidth within the office to support Phil's efforts. And certainly I've seen over 2020 the important role that Phil has as it relates to emergency preparedness and response. So again, we sat down and we developed a strategy to do that. The City of Wausau does have a need for some additional emergency management technician work. We're going to fully fund the difference in that upgrade through a contract with the City of Wausau. But again, what that is going to allow for all of the people of Marathon County to be benefited, because that person is going to be available not only to support the City of Wausau's needs, but it's going to expand and increase really the professional capacity within that office to assist in emergency management planning. It'll allow Phil to be more active with local municipalities as it relates to emergency planning, response, and mitigation. So again, another example that financially makes very good sense. We're funding that position expansion, but it's also, from a service perspective, we're improving the quality of service we deliver. Employee resources, I already referenced the reorganization potential with administration. I can't overstate, though, the value of the enterprise resource planning software solution. We are replacing a financial system, our Kayenta system, that is in excess of 20 years old. It is no longer a tool. It is a hindrance in the work that we do. And we have a real opportunity with the implementation of this ERP system to not only improve functioning within finance, our finance department, but also our employee resources department. So that's going to be a real focus in 2021 and beyond. I already noted about the work we need to do around employee healthcare and cost evaluation. Employee resources is going to lead those efforts. As it relates to facilities and capital management, the only thing I'll say there is this was a difficult year for their budget. The pandemic, as I'm sure you're all aware, if you are a commercial real estate holder of office space anywhere in the country, it is a very uncertain future for you. because many businesses are transitioning to telework. Marathon County does have several entities that we rent office space to. That rent and those lease agreements are managed by Facilities and Capital Management. So at the end of several months ago, we were provided notice by our most significant renter that they were in fact making that same move to telework. What that means for Marathon County is a $300,000 shortfall moving forward on an annual basis relative to rental income. That's at the Lakeview Professional Plaza. So that's really the only budget highlight. They do have some increased costs associated with utilities at our expanded footprint at the North Central Healthcare Campus, but over time, those increased costs are going to be mitigated as we really develop that long-range facility plan. So you'll see moving forward that long-range facility plan is a real priority for Facilities and Capital Management. A portion of that is really engaging with University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, Wausau campus to clarify what our roles and expectations are under our agreement to again be sustainable. I already referenced finance and the ERP system. The health department, I'll talk about this much more in a couple of minutes, but the health department budget is built on two key assumptions. You'll see that in the budget highlights section, the last two lines. First, that the health department return to its pre-COVID mission programs. And second, that we receive state or federal funding for any of our pandemic-related responses. We know that our pandemic response activities are not stopping in 2021. We are fully aware of that. This is a significant budget assumption that I want to draw your attention to. Our budget is built on, the health department budget is built on returning to those pre-COVID programs. That's what is defining our costs. We know we're going to be asked to do those COVID response activities. We are assuming, and this has largely been true in 2020, that any costs associated with those response efforts will be funded through state or federal dollars. I already talked about the highway department and the relocation of their facility and the 2050 transportation sustainability plan. Those are real important endeavors we need to move forward on. That 2050 transportation sustainability plan is really important to our long-term financial position. As it relates to the library, you'll hear more about the library system task force in 2021. Really no change with respect to their 2021 proposed budget relative to 2020. But we do have an opportunity moving forward that could have some financial impact, and that is the facility planning relative to the third floor of the Wausau Library. We need to develop a strategy as part of that larger facility planning effort. What are we going to do with that third floor, and what revenue options are presenting themselves? The medical examiner, Vice Chair McEwen has served as the chair of the Regional Forensic Science Center project, the task force, for in excess of a year. We're going to talk more about that in 2021 and what that means. It could have significant financial ramifications for the county. We have a business plan that's been submitted. Quite simply, we are continuing to work to develop a partnership that makes this viable. Right now, it's operationally viable. That is, it would cash flow, but what it does not do is service the debt that would be associated with any facility upgrade. So we're continuing to meet with healthcare systems, the Medical College of Wisconsin, as well as Portage County. There's a lot of interest and support for the project. We just need to find out if the partnerships are there such that this is financially viable. Parks, Recreation, and Forestry. Similar to the Highway Sustainability Plan, our 2021 efforts are going to be dominated by trying to develop a similar sustainability plan for our parks and forest systems. There are models in the state of Wisconsin, most notably Washington County, where you can develop those sustainability plans to reduce long-term tax levy investment in parks and forests. And we will bring some plan, we'll have those discussions with the Environmental Resources Committee, and we'll move that forward in 2021. Sheriff's Office, I already talked about some of the big picture things within their budget for 2021. The body cameras, there's $160,000 allocated to implement the use of those body cameras. That's an annual cost that we'll have to continue. We upgraded the amount of funds to more accurately capture the cost of equipment maintenance for our special teams. Fleet maintenance. And again, largely, we accomplished those, funding those priorities through that reduction in inmate housing. Moving forward, we're going to have to make sure we really find a way to make that system budgeting work, and we can't lose sight of what has been a priority for the last several years, our emergency communications infrastructure. It's been a priority of this board to fund dispatcher positions.
Excuse me, we have somebody that has their mic on open or they're not muted. Please mute your phone or iPad. Thank you.
As I indicated, we're going to need to move forward with our emergency communications infrastructure, the funding of those dispatchers. And then the last department that I'll talk about, is social services. The social services department did an exceedingly strong job in bringing a budget that ultimately is $132,000, almost $133,000 less in tax levy than their 2020 budget. That said, we need to make sure that we are hitting those targets relative to out-of-home care budgets. We're going to be monitoring that moving forward. And then the last big piece for that department is really planning for that relocation to North Central Healthcare. That is a goal of that renovation of that campus. It'll come with significant projected cost savings because we'll be able to divest ourselves of the current social services building. But there's a significant amount of planning that needs to go along with that effort. So that's the department budget sections, and I'll be very quick, 3 minutes on risks. Again, a budget is a product of assumptions. So what assumptions within that underlie our 2021 budget, from my assessment, are most likely to prove inaccurate? And I'll be brief, but if you look on page 25 of the document, it's our projected sales tax. Sales tax is volatile, as I put in the narrative. We are taking an approach. We are budgeting an increase of $54,000 relative to sales tax. But again, that is over 2020. That is an assumption that is based on our economic recovery continuing in a modest way. State aids, the next page in the graphs, we are, on page 26, we are budgeting consistent revenues from state aids. That is a significant assumption in light of the budget shortfalls that are projected at the state of Wisconsin. You'll see in this graph, we have just shy of $3.9 million of revenues. And then also, Marathon County is fortunate, we also receive utility tax revenues of about $1.8 million. Not every county in the state of Wisconsin receives that level or any utility tax. So as the state seeks to balance its budget, deliver a balanced budget in its fiscal year, there is a significant potential that those revenues will be reduced. And again, that's an assumption that underlies our budget, that they will be maintained stable. I already referred to another assumption relative to revenues, and that is that within the health department budget, if we are asked to do COVID-related response efforts, we are assuming that we will have corresponding revenues to fund those efforts from the state and federal government. With respect to assumptions on the expense side, I already talked about the jail census. We are One of the budget assumptions we have is that we are able to maintain some of the reductions in jail census that would lead to cost savings. Criminal justice jury trials. The DA's office budget, the clerk of court's budget does not have sufficient funds within their budgets to fund jury trials. I'll talk about how we captured what steps we took in the budget to counteract that assumption, but I just want to let you know, it's the assumption built into their departmental budgets is that they will not have to fund the full cost of if we have a number of significant jury trials move forward in 2021, that there will be an alternative funding source for those. Similar to the jail census, I already talked about out-of-home care budget and social services. We need to hit those targets, and our budget assumes we will be able to do that. On page 4 and 5 of the budget, I talk about balancing the budget through expanding our budgeting practice of budgeting for attrition within key departments. We expanded that. So our budget assumption is that we will in fact have the attrition that we are assuming we are going to have. So with all those risks, how did we protect ourselves against those risks? With respect to sales tax, we picked the lowest of the 3 estimates that were provided to us by the Wisconsin Counties Association. It was actually slightly less than the assumption that was approved by the HR Finance and Property Committee. With respect to budgeting for attrition, we are confident that our projections are accurate. We have looked at historical data, and we have had budget surpluses relative to payroll in the departments and divisions where we have expanded that practice. And then with respect to the one-time funds for criminal justice jury trials or a reduction in state aids, assuming it's a one-time reduction in state aids, you'll see from what would be page 29 of your budget, the budget message, we have allocated $850,000 in the contingency fund for 2021. That is the most that has been allocated in that fund. Again, these are one-time dollars, but it's the most money that's been put into that, into the budget since 2014 for those costs. Again, one-time money, but it is a significant safeguard against the risks that I just outlined for you that underlie your 2021 proposed budget from administration. So with that, I've talked a great deal about the 3 goals that I had, and hopefully I answered your questions about what accounts for that $9.5 million increase and what does that mean for taxpayers? What are the cost centers of the county budget? And what are the areas of most risk? So with that, I'll turn it over to HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson.
Supervisor Robinson?
Tried up with unmuted. I want to thank Lance, Christy, all of their staff and the department heads for their efforts to address critical needs during these uncertain times. There is a great deal of uncertainty due to COVID and its toll on the economy and demands for services. And I think this budget, while not having a lot of new spending initiatives, tries to put us in the correct direction. I think we need to rethink our approaches in the future to address some of that uncertainty, such as state shared revenue sales tax, and the contingency fund increase does help support those efforts. I also support the administrator's systems approach in evaluating programs in the justice system, and I think that's on a long-term basis going to reap benefits for the counties. I think one of the things that this county, or that what this budget does, it begins to address the challenges that we have in terms of infrastructure that are reflected in the capital improvement plan. It tries to address the outdated system that we have in finance and HR by replacing that system. It also changes how we address facility needs and gets away from the past practice of ranking and avoiding needed repairs by relying on our professional staff to develop recommendations in a timely manner. I think we've learned through the jail and the library roof that delaying costs doesn't avoid those costs, but rather magnifies those costs on a long-term basis. We also need to be smarter at trying to leverage outside funding sources. And the Finance Committee added $2 million of spending in the transportation area. And one of the reasons for that is that we received our general transportation aid estimates for next year and went down $100,000. 2 years ago, we had a $193,000 cut. The general transportation aids from the state of Wisconsin are based upon our 6-year spending average. And the way you increase your state transportation aids is not to cut your spending, but rather look at how you can maximize the reimbursement through the Department of Transportation. If you look at the funding level of general transportation aids, it looks like we've had a gradual increase over the last 10 years, but if you throw in the year 2011, the transportation aids in 2011 were higher than they're anticipated to be next year. So we have lost pace to inflation, and we have bridge decks that need repairing and other projects that need to be updated. So the Finance Committee added $2 million to try to address those. There's also dollars that were put in for broadband expansion. The COVID problem has highlighted the need for adequate internet services to address telehealth, telework, and virtual learning. And we're trying to partner with internet service providers through the Public Service Commission's grant application process. And we've had some very encouraging meetings this week, and we're looking to try to expand broadband services to unserved and underserved areas. I'd like to just spend a little bit of time talking about how the budget process is changed. We are recording this meeting or this presentation, and it will be shared with the public via link prior to the November 5th public hearing. And instead of having the administrator repeat this at that meeting, we're going to go directly into public comments. If you recall the last budget, it was 10:30 in the evening before we got to public comments on the budget. And the purpose of the budget hearing is to hear from our constituents and others interested in our budget. So we're trying to reform and revise the process to allow for that input to take place. We've also changed the date of the hearing from that Tuesday, second Tuesday in November, to the first Thursday, and we will be voting on the budget on that second Tuesday of November. We would also ask that if you have concerns about the budget, that you communicate those to me, and we will try, the Finance Committee or the HR Finance and Property Committee will try to review those before the budget comes up for a vote and make recommendations. We have completed our work on the budget, but we'll always entertain new ideas and concepts. But if you desire to amend the budget, please be aware of the practice of needing to not only identify the proposed change, but also how it is funded. And we're hoping that this process will be more inclusive, get to public comments earlier, and have more meaningful input on the budget. So with that, again, I would like to thank Lance and Christy and their team for their efforts and putting together a budget for these times, and recognizing the need for incremental change. And turn it back over to Lance, or open it up for questions.
Okay, it's turned back over to the chairman, and I would open it up for questions from the county board. Any questions? Supervisor Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question on page 42, the facilities and capital management. I guess I'm not in the loop. Did we decide to go ahead with the social services building being moved? Or for that, we're trying to make a center for all those helping agencies? Is that, did I hear they're going to the North Central Healthcare or something?
I'll let the administrator address the question.
Thank you, Supervisor Lamont.
The reason I'm asking is we have that Lakeview Professional Plaza now open. I just wondered if what's going to be done with that.
Thank you for the question. Very good question. With respect to the social services relocation to the North Central Healthcare Campus, the plan when we did the renovation master planning in 2017 and 2018 accounted for moving social services, ultimately moving social services to that campus in approximately 2023. The discussion you're referencing relative to the Community Partners Campus and whether or not that move, that relocation would happen on a much quicker timeline, namely next year, really doesn't impact the fact that it had always been part of the plan to relocate social services. That being said, certainly if the board ultimately directs administration to move forward with relocating social services by September of next year, that will have a significant impact, a workload impact, and a planning impact. But to your underlying question about has the decision been made to relocate social services to that campus, that decision, as I interpret it, was made with the board's previous decisions relative to the master plan.
And,
Okay, thank you.
And just a little bit addition, at this point, the decision as to whether or not the community partners will be, taking over that property earlier has not been finalized. We're still in the process of evaluating that.
Could they be steered towards this Lakeview area in the interim?
This is Administrator Leonard. I had conversations, I've had multiple meetings with two representatives from the Community Partners Campus. That location at the North Central Healthcare Campus is really not, from their perspective, overly desirable. So
Oh, that's where
it
it is.
wasn't a viable fit based on the nature of the work that they needed to do.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Board Chair. I heard that you said that there was a decrease in the census, in the jail census. I think it was 86 less over a 5-month period. And I'm wondering, is that because there was this COVID-19 scare in the jails and some people were being released? I know that that's been happening. I was wondering if that's impacted the decrease in costs, in the jail costs.
Certainly, some of the protocols that the sheriff's office put in place relative to COVID prevention have impacted jail census. For example, we have a lot more people that have been released on electronic monitoring. We are handling low-level offenses in a different way, utilizing what's referred to as the proxy, and I think I referenced that in the budget message and also in our annual update to the strategic plan. The proxy is a tool that assists law enforcement in making a determination of whether to take someone to jail or whether that individual can be released. I hesitate to say that the jail was, and I don't think the jail is releasing people because of a COVID scare. They undertook a systematic approach to really making sure that they had individuals within the jail that needed to be within the jail, and if there was a safe way to allow an individual to remain in the community, they rededicated themselves to that. That certainly has been a portion of that reduction. I would also point to some of the efforts that are within the narrative beginning on page 17 of that evidence-based decision-making group. It's been a long-standing effort of that group to look at opportunities to improve our criminal justice system. And I would infer from the data on that chart that some of those reductions are also due to those efforts. But most certainly it's a constellation of factors that lead to those reductions over not only our 2017 and 2018 numbers, but also the significant reduction we saw in 2020.
Okay, any other questions? Supervisor Krause?
Yes, I have another question, and this is pertain to the requests from the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office for some employees for this year, but you have chosen to select other positions to hire, which were lower positions on the budget. And I am wondering, particularly this Lieutenant Investigation Division, where the salary, the maximum there, it says, Communications Specialist, Public Safety. The salary there is $176,630. And the average income in Wausau, I believe they're saying, or Marathon County, is $45,000. I'm wondering, is that, it seems exceedingly high for that position. And are you possibly looking to fill the District Attorney's Office positions that were requested and the Sheriff's Office positions that were requested? Are you probably thinking of hiring for 2022?
I'll try to answer all of your questions. With respect to the communications specialist positions and the salary that you referenced, that was for 2 positions. Those are dispatch positions. So the total dollar amounts you see in those, in that row of that spreadsheet on page 7 are for the 2 positions.
Okay.
The lieutenant position is a different position that was requested by the Sheriff's Office. That relates to a lieutenant in our investigations division assigned to our Special Investigations Unit. So I hope I answered your question with regard to funding. With respect to planning for the 2022 budget, our budget building process is such that individual departments make requests for new positions according to a time frame that is set forth in the county board's rules and our policies. We evaluate our ability to fill those positions in light of the financial environment in which we're operating on any one year. So you indicated that the proposed budget, and it's accurate from the administrator, the proposed budget did fund 2 new positions or position upgrades. I referenced those before, one in emergency management and one in the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department. As I indicated in my presentation, each of those new positions was funded entirely through the departmental budgets offering the new positions. So the emergency management upgrade from the administrative coordinator to the emergency management technician will be funded entirely. That incremental increase will be funded entirely through that intergovernmental agreement with the City of Wausau. With respect to the recreation coordinator, the motorized recreation coordinator position in the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department, that department prioritized the realignment of resources within the department to fund that increase, that 0.15 FTE increase. Looking forward to the 2022 budget, I'm certainly hopeful that we are successful in developing that system budgeting approach that I referenced and that we can fulfill those needs. The needs of the Sheriff's Office as it relates to that lieutenant position, the 2 communications positions, and the needs of the DA's office with respect to the 2 positions that are before you on page 7. Those have been requests that have made, they've been requests historically. They've been offered before. It's a long-standing need, and that's what I was referencing in my my narrative, the department summaries, that we really need to find a different way to fund those. The DA's office position for one of the positions is for an attorney position. As is referenced in my departmental summary, the state of Wisconsin is technically responsible for funding those positions. That said, the people that are impacted by the lack of adequate funding from the state are the people of Marathon County. So developing a strategy to meet those needs I'm hopeful in 2022 we can do that through the budget process. But I certainly can't stand here today and say it's my intent to fund those.
Thank you.
And if you look on page 7, those 2 upgrades, the total cost at the control point is $9,949. The other positions that we're talking about as far as the lieutenant and the 2 communications specialists and the district attorney's request total $460,000 annually. So we're talking about the increase that was budgeted this year of $9,900 and the request of an additional $460,000. So is there any other, Supervisor Dickinson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up and add a question in relation to the DA positions. And that is, we're adding a 6th judgeship next year. We've already talked about the possible jury costs, finding a way for that to fund those if the jury cases arise. And we've requested these 2 positions, but we turned them down. My question then is, how is it going to be possible to handle the caseload with another judgeship? Thank you.
Supervisor, that's a very good question. At evidence-based decision-making, that we have a case processing group where the impacts of a 6th judge, that is probably the most significant topic of discussion right now. It's not only, to your point, increasing, if you squeeze that balloon, right, adding a 6th judge is squeezing that balloon. It's putting additional workload certainly on the DA's office, also on the clerk of courts, and also on the sheriff's office relative to court security and prisoner transport. So I actually met with the presiding judge, the chief judge, Judge Greg Huber today. We need to continue to have those discussions and see what changes we can make to how the court system operates and how work flows within that system to accommodate that increased workload. Otherwise, to your point, I mean, it is simply putting a significant amount of additional work on staff, not only within within county departments, the DA's office and the sheriff's office, but I think it's important to note, and it was discussed in the 2019 calendar year at Public Safety. The State Public Defender's Office, there's a significant shortage of defense attorneys within Marathon County and throughout the state of Wisconsin, and those resources, simply adding another court to which those resources must respond without changing how that system works, quite simply, I don't think is going to be very effective long-term.
Supervisor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment that I'm really impressed with the collaboration with emergency management between the county and the city of Wausau, and that I'm hoping to look further to further collaboration with other entities. And I do agree with Lance that it is a win-win-win. Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on, and I also want to express my sincere thank you for the great efforts on not only administration, but on the finance department and all the department heads on the work that started early in this year, in May, when we started the budget, early process till a culmination of the budget where we're at this point. So we'll move on to item 9, review and discussion of Tuesday meeting agenda items. Under A, appointments, 9A1, Supervisor District Number 2, oath of office and approval of appointment. So I'll have the appointment read first, and that also will require a vote of the board. I do have a question for the Corp Counsel. It says action will be taken on this appointment on October 15th. Does that suffice for a vote on the
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I believe the standard is the public needs to be reasonably apprised of what will happen, and action is a vote.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd have the nomination that I'm bringing forward read, and then we will take action before the oath, by the board, before oath would be administered.
Appointing Jennifer Bizotto, 1118 South 12th Street, Wausau, to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, representing District Number 2. The term is effective upon signing of the oath of office and will expire at the organizational county board meeting in April 2022. Further, upon approval of the board, appointing Ms. Bizotto to the Public Safety Committee.
What is the pleasure of the board? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Harris. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the motion to approve the appointment of Supervisor, or excuse me, of Ms. Bizotto to District 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign.
Aye.
That was an opposition.
Yes.
The motion is carried, but was not unanimous. And I would ask the clerk to administer the oath of office.
All right, Supervisor Bizotto, if you could stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me, please. I, Jennifer Bizotto,
I, Jennifer Bizotto,
having been elected or appointed to the office of Marathon County Board Supervisor District 2,
having been elected or appointed to Marathon County District 2,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
but have not yet entered on the duties thereof,
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations, Ms. Bizotto, to Supervisory District Number 2. And we will move on to item number 9A12, Marathon County Treasurer. I'd ask the clerk to read the appointment.
Appointing Connie Beiersdorf, 158537 Buck Trail Road, Wausau, for appointment by the board pursuant to State Statute 17.21, Parent 3, Wisconsin State Statute, to the position of Treasurer for Marathon County for the residue of the unexpired term, effective November 2nd, 2020, through the end of the current term of office, January 2nd, 2021.
Is there any questions by the board? Is there any questions by the board? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Thank you. And number 9A3, Health and Human Services Committee.
Appointing Supervisor Kelly Gaber to the Marathon County Health and Human Services Committee to complete the term of Supervisor Romy Wagner.
And in the packet, there was a misprint that Ms. Gaber was, Supervisor Gaber was being appointed to the Public Safety Committee. That will be corrected for the packet for Tuesday. Any questions on that appointment? Any questions on that appointment? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to item 9A4, Public Library Board.
Appointing Dino Corvino, 5016 Chadwick Street, Schofield, to replace Sarah Thurs on the Marathon County Public Library Board for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023.
Any discussion on that appointment? Any discussion on that appointment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to resolutions. Under resolutions, Health and Human Services Committee, item 9B1A, and I would recognize the Chair of Health and Human Services, Supervisor Butke.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to pull the resolution from consideration this evening, as there is some fine tuning that's going on to craft this a little better going forward. So again, I'd like to pull the resolution this evening.
Okay, the item 9B1A, approving a pilot program to provide bus service, has been pulled and will be worked on further. Item 9B2 from Executive Committee, 9B2A, a resolution commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, Resolution 63-20. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make one comment. I would propose eliminating 2 of these paragraphs in this resolution. The first is paragraph 14 about the Equal Rights Amendment. It is a proposed amendment to the Constitution. It is not an actual amendment. And so therefore, by having it here, I feel like we're taking a position on this. And I don't think that that's something appropriate for the board to be doing because it can be quite political, the ERA. The second would be paragraph 15. After that really is quite vague. There's really nothing in it other than saying, we're going to look at some other ideas of some future ideas about women and their stances, and I just don't think it adds any value to the resolution. So I would propose that we remove those 2 paragraphs.
That obviously that's ripe for discussion today, but no action today. It would be required to be amended at the Tuesday meeting. So is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Maybe a point of clarification, Supervisor Dickinson, which ones are you proposing to, where it starts out each January in the US? Is that the whereas you're asking to be removed or going to offer
That's
an
correct.
amendment? And the one following, residents of Marathon County
Correct.
are asked not only to remember, is that the other one? Just so we
Correct.
have a point of clarification, so the supervisors have understanding of what your motion may be on Tuesday.
Yes,
Thank you.
those 2 paragraphs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll move on to announcements and/or requests. The clerk's asked to announce that if you're in the courthouse, your mailbox, in some cases, has a fair amount of stuff in them. Please check your mailbox, and whenever you're in the building, and have those empty those. Take that stuff out of your mailbox. Any other announcements? I would make an announcement that the Eastern and Western Towns Association meetings that were scheduled the next Thursday for the Eastern towns and the following Thursday for the Western towns, because of the surge in COVID cases in Marathon County, Both chairmen of the Eastern and chairman of the Western have canceled those meetings, so those meetings will not be taking place. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Seeing none, we are down to item number 11. Motion by Vice Chair McEwen to adjourn. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Same sign. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all.